Welcome.
Kara, let's start with you. Is there a specific reason or issue that convinced you to run?
I don't think that there's a specific thing, no. There are some things that have come up more recently in our state that I think are very important, and perhaps were maybe what kind of pushed me a little bit more strongly. But I really think that government has been getting more and more out of touch with the people who really matter, and that's the voters. And that is just kind of becoming more of a crystallizing force in some of the events and the issues that our state is facing. And I think that it's time that citizens who really care about that get involved, much more so than just those of us who are running. I mean, when you look at the number of positions in the state legislature that are challenged, it's sad that there aren't more challengers. And it's also sad that we only have 56% of our population who's eligible to vote, even registered. I think that's really concerning.
Similar question to you, Bill. Why'd you decide to run for re-election?
Well, thanks for the opportunity today, by the way. And I think I always told myself when I was walking up the steps of the Capitol that if I ever lost any of the passion that it took to do this job, that I would happily step away. And the fact is I still have a lot of passion for it. I was really proud of the efforts the last session. I was one of the more successful legislators being able to get some bills passed that really help our constituents here in Natrona County. I was particularly proud of the mental health bill, which got some bureaucracy out of the way and helped some mental health professionals to be able to provide better services to those needing mental health services. So along with that, a couple of small business majors, unemployment bills that really fixed things and helped independent contractors, for example. And that takes some effort, and it takes some knowledge of how to get a bill through down there. And I appreciated the opportunity to help neighbors and friends with that. You know, it goes a lot bigger than that for me. I decided to run again because I believe I'm in great position to help Natrona County. I try to study as hard as I can on every single issue that comes before us, and that's pretty challenging. I like that. That's what I like about it. I think it's a very challenging environment. There's never an easy answer to public policy, but I always try to keep District 27 in mind and keep Natrona County in mind, and that's kind of what I've been about.
Okay. Bill, describe a vote you've made that you do differently if you have the chance.
Well, it's tough. You know, you take a lot of them down the road with you. You stay awake at night. I can't tell you how many nights you lay in the hotel room wondering how you're going to go the next day or how you went the day before. And but there is one in particular I've really thought about a great deal, and I know I would change if I could do it again. And it was the privacy vote on the presidential search at the University of Wyoming. And I had become convinced that it was important for us to pass that legislation so that that search would be as robust as it could be on behalf of the university. I had been told that some candidates were pulling out because they knew that their names would be involved and be made public. And I thought, you know, I want to help the university get the best president possible. I'm not convinced that that was the right vote this time, by this time. I think if I'm sent back down by the voters of District 27, I want to think long and hard about transparency in government, and you know, I want to revisit some of those kind of issues that have come up the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Kara, response to that?
Well, first of all, I appreciate that my opponent has the insight and the ability to look at his record and admit that there may be some things that he could have done better. I think that's admirable quality. I think privacy issues are always very important, and I think there's probably a lot regarding the issues surrounding the president of the University of Wyoming that we could talk about that are very important to the state of Wyoming. I'm not happy with what happened in regards to losing somebody that we had that I think was doing an excellent job, and so I applaud Bill for, you know, looking hard at that, and also for mentioning what he did about transparency in government. I think that transparency in government is an issue that's central to some of the things that are important in Wyoming right now. I know that he voted against an open meeting law, and I was intrigued and concerned about that. I don't know how, you know, he would respond if asked to reply to why he did that. But, you know, we've had these issues of open meeting laws. I think they should be strong. I think we should allow them to be audio taped and reviewable. I think we need to have accountability in government. I think we need to have good open records laws, and of course people in the press would, I would hope, agree with me about that. And we do need to have an accountable government to the people and to the Constitution that governs our actions. And I was kind of, part of me hoping that he would have said that he regretted the way he voted on SF 104, but you know, obviously he feels that that was a justified vote, and that's one of the areas that we definitely disagree on in this election cycle.
Kara, what time commitment do you think a seat on the legislature requires, and do you have enough time?
That's a great question. I think it requires a tremendous amount of time. I, of course, have asked that question to many people that are in the state legislature and have been serving, and I get a variety of answers depending, I think, on the commitment of the people that I ask. But overall, I expect that it will be kind of like having another probably almost full-time job. I mean, you're in session 1 or 2 months, depending on whether it's a budget session each year. And then you've got a lot of committee meetings that go on at other times, and there are all kinds of things that you attend in terms of service organization meetings and things that you're invited to participate in. And I'm fortunate in that because I'm an independent consultant, I work for a company, but I kind of manage my own time. I can make the time that's necessary for the public service that I would be expending as a senator for the state of Wyoming. And I would, you know, really count it a joy to be able to attend many different kinds of meetings in addition to the time that we spend in our formal proceedings in Cheyenne. So I think it'll be substantial, and I think I'm up to the task.
Okay. Bill, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Regarding the time commitment, it's very dramatic at times, and you know, I was talking with Charlie Scott, the longtime senator from Natrona County, one day, and I asked him, I said, has it always been this way? Because it's really been busy the last 3 or 4 years. And he said, no, it's really compounded greatly just in the last few years. There are a lot of things expected out of legislators. Let me just say this. I think one of the best things about Wyoming is that we have a citizen legislature. When we go down to Cheyenne, we vote on all of these difficult issues. We do the best we can. We come back home and we live with what we've done. We don't have any staff, you know. We don't have much help to do this, except just put a little extra gas in your truck and head down the road. And it's definitely a commitment, but it's something, as I said before, you have to have passion for, and I have that passion, and I think what you do is you carve out the time that's necessary. You know, that's what a citizen legislature is all about.
Bill, we'll start with you on this one. Legislators hike the gas tax to increase funding for roads, but the boost is really just a small band-aid to a big, important problem. What would you propose for highway funding?
Well, I think one of the reasons that I've supported putting so much reserve funds in place is that at some point I think that's going to benefit our state. And I think that one of the ways that we can use some of that reserve funding, which by the way topped $7 billion just this summer, something I'm very proud of, to have been a part of a legislature that for the most part just in the last 10 years has been able to put those permanent funds in place, which will benefit our kids and our grandkids from now on. That said, it is disappointing that we're only part of the way there. Infrastructure funding simply isn't what it used to be. And here's one of my favorite stories. When I was doing all the homework necessary and serving on the Transportation Committee, when we proposed that legislation, Here's one of the things I found out. In 1969, when my dad pulled up to the pump to fill up his car, he paid 25 cents for a gallon of gas. 7 cents of that went to the roads. Today, we pay $3.40, which, by the way, is slightly less than when the 10-cent tax went into place 2 years ago, and we pay 24 cents on that gallon of gas that goes to the roads. That generation knew all about investing in the infrastructure and what it took to build roads and highways. And that was very, very compelling to me, that some of this we need to pay as we go. We cannot just hand over a bad infrastructure system to our kids and say, you know what, we just didn't get around to it. That's something that's our responsibility too. So two things. We can use some reserve funding, I think, as we go forward. And second of all, I think, I think that we have to own up to what our responsibility is as a generation before we pass this state on.
Kara?
I'm just kind of amazed that we're talking about how to fund our roads. I mean, obviously we haven't been doing what we should be doing, or we wouldn't be having this discussion. It's a basic necessity. It's, to me, the same as analogous to paying your utilities in your house. You don't wait until the end of the month to say, oh, whoops, we forgot to pay the utilities. That's something you plan for. And in a state that has a $9 billion budget and has one of the lowest populations in the country, especially, not that it's easy. I don't mean at all to sound like I'm ignorant about the complexities of the state budget. There are all kinds of demands, but we have to be fiscally conservative. We have to look at what are our main needs, take care of those, make sure they're taken care of. And, some people have suggested that perhaps we are putting aside a little bit too much in our auxiliary budget. I mean, if we're going without, or we're allowing our roads to become, and our other infrastructure to become degraded in the process of saving 30% of our budget every year, then maybe our priorities are a little bit out of line. And so essentially I agree with Mr. Landen, but I think that it's kind of a black eye a little bit that we're in this position where we're now talking about, well, how are we going to provide for long-term maintenance of our roads and bridges and all of our infrastructure.
Kara, for you, what should Wyoming do to strengthen the market for its natural resources, and specifically coal?
That's obviously one of the main issues in our elections and in our state is our mineral wealth. Coal. The law that was passed quite some time ago that created a greater market for coal-fired power plants and the kind of coal that we mine here, as opposed to the coal that's produced in the eastern United States, helped us a great deal. I think the most obvious answer is that we have to continue to deal effectively with balancing both production of coal, marketing it, with the regulation and the environmental concerns that are all around us. Now, the current presidential administration, which is a part of our politics, we've got to deal with that, and I think that politics has been too top-down rather than enough bottom-up. I think part of the role of the state legislature is to communicate the needs and the wants and the desires and the priorities of the state of Wyoming up to our congressional delegation. So it is to also be able to effectively mitigate the over-regulation of the coal industry that's come down from the Obama administration. Right now they're putting restrictions on coal-fired power plants that would double the emissions capture requirements from what they are now, and the technology to do that is in its infancy. There's only one state that's even able to effectively meet those requirements, and that's because of the unique considerations that they have in their power plants. We have to just work very hard with our congressional delegation on how do we resist when we need to resist, and how do we responsibly comply with good environmental policy as well. I mean, it's a balance.
Well, thank you, and I agree with Kara. I think that's one of the big issues moving forward. We've already talked about it in your newspaper, the difficulties that presents for school facilities, for example. No coal lease bonus money's coming in because nobody's bidding on the rights to mine that coal because of the weakened market. I was discouraged earlier last week. I was able to participate in an event and ran into the Congresswoman Lummis and visited with her for quite a while about the coal situation. And she expressed that this administration has been sending envoys around the world to encourage them not to buy Wyoming's coal or any coal from the United States. There's nothing that discourages me more than that. But let me say what the legislature has done, and this is where I think we can have some impact. Value-added sorts of investments, I think, can really pay off in the coal markets. Coal gasification, CO2 capture, sequestration. I'm really proud of the fact that this legislature has led the way across the United States in sequestration of carbon. So a lot to be done there, a lot to combat. I also agree with Kara in the fact that the Wyoming legislature, along with the governor, everybody in the state of Wyoming's got to do what they can to share the story of coal. I think it's going to take every bit of all the resources that we have to power all of the smartphones that we've got out there nowadays. And so hopefully the pendulum will swing back a little bit and open those markets back up. In the meantime, we've sent envoys overseas. Some of our legislators have gone to Taiwan and Japan and some other places. The markets are there. We just need to get it freed up on the West Coast to allow us through, and I think the markets are there.
Bill, what would you, as a legislator, do to improve education in Wyoming?
No, it's a great question. You know, Kara's right. There's an issue that didn't set well with some people. 104, I think, was an attempt to take a look at what ended up being a pretty bad governance situation. Regardless of how the Supreme Court decision came down, we still have a governance issue as to who is really in charge of education. You know, the Constitution says that those duties of the superintendent are prescribed by law. Well, it's the legislature that prescribes law. However, you also have a state board of education. They are technically the experts. You've heard some people argue for elected state boards. I don't happen to agree with that because I think you would lose your balance and you'd lose the opportunity to represent various regions in the state. But regarding education, part of the accountability effort of this legislature over the last 6 or 8 years has been aimed at trying to hold schools and leaders of schools a little bit more accountable. We invest more than any other state in the union in education, and I think many of us, me included, are not quite satisfied with where we're landing. We'd like to be number one. Well, that's what that accountability effort has really been all about, is to try to put some measures in place so that we can put some expectations there. That's where you begin to talk about standards too. And one of the reasons that I am in favor of higher standards is that we've got to prepare our students to go out there in the real world. Not just to Casper College, not just to the University of Wyoming. They go all over the world to compete. And I think it's important that we do everything we can for them in our K-12 system to make sure that they're prepared. Much to do.
Kara?
This is an issue upon which my opponent and I disagree pretty stridently, I would say. We do agree that standards and high standards are important. There's no question about that. I actually have my degree, my formal degree in education, and I left that field many years ago to pursue other professional endeavors, but education has always been close to my heart. I taught English and speech, and I taught English as a second language. Also was one of the most fun things I ever did as a teacher. But I feel that education really is something that is best held accountable at the local level. It's the teachers, the parents, the grandparents, and the taxpayers who have the greatest stake in education. And when we make our educational system accountable to those people and encourage those people to be involved in it, I think we get the best education. And we could, roll back the time clock all the way back to the 1800s, at which time both Bill's ancestors and mine were homesteading in Wyoming and South Dakota, respectively. And they were educating people in one-room schoolhouses with classic curriculum materials. And they were doing an excellent job. We don't have even the basic skills covered in the way that we're educating kids today. And I believe that the standards in education for Wyoming were being neglected for a long time prior to when all of the controversy happened with SF 104 and the current superintendent. I think that we were being lackadaisical in terms of looking at our standards even before that time. When we talk about accountability from a statewide standpoint, and you look at the historical information and do a content analysis of the newspapers and the media, you'll see that accountability was always spoken of in the context of federal government programs. And that is only one way to look at accountability. I'm talking about accountability to parents, teachers, grandparents, and taxpayers. And when we talk about the standards that have been adopted in a rush, in fact, we were encouraged to adopt these Common Core standards before they were even written, and states were signing on board for Race to the Top money before they even knew what Common Core standards were. You'll see, if you do any research on it, that these are not high standards, and they're based on uniformity. They're based on equality. Let's be equal among states and between states. Let's make sure all of our kids know the same thing at the same time. And that's not the right size of education for every state. I'm in favor of standards that are based on excellence, not uniformity, not conformity. And I'm also interested in standards that are based on what people in the state of Wyoming, who are education experts, who have a stake in the education and have a stake in Wyoming, have to say about it. Not what somebody from the federal government has to say, not what somebody from the National Governors Association has to say, not what somebody from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has to say. There's a whole lot about these standards that are being swallowed in Wyoming that I think are of great concern, and education and the education of our children is one of the most important things that we can be responsible for in our state. I have a little bit of information which should grow before the election on my own website about this issue, and I would encourage people to look at my website, which is simply my name, www.Kara, K-A-R-A, Linn, L-I-N-N.com. And the final thing I'll say about that is that the Common Core standards were first adopted in the state of New York 2 years before other states began adopting these standards. That state's teachers union has voted unanimously to repeal those standards. And there's a governor in the state of Maine who is in danger of losing his bid for a re-election because the citizens of that state are so upset about Common Core standards. So I just think we need to put the brakes on this, and we need to look at better standards than what we're settling for right now.
Carol, we'll start with you on this one. Game and fish funding, also an ongoing problem with the department stuck between rising costs and capped fees. What would you propose as a solution to the funding loss?
That one kind of came out of left field for me in one of our forums not too long ago. Personally, I don't hunt, I don't fish, I don't camp. I'm kind of like a Hilton girl. I like to stay in the hotel and wash my hair in the morning. So this is one, that I am definitely not going to be well versed on, to be quite honest with you. What I understand about it is that, we can either, increase fees and kind of let the sportsman, the market sort of fund its own activities in terms of, those things that go on in the public spaces in our state, or we can dip into our general fund. And I know there was a recommendation made to the governor for a certain amount of money to cover certain things. I think it amounted to maybe between $200,000 and $300,000 that they asked for to fund what they need. And to be honest, I don't have enough knowledge of those factors to make a decision as to whether I think that we should dip into our general fund or we should raise the fees. If I'm elected, of course, I will get the input of other legislators as well as sportsmen who use, those services and see, is it even realistic to increase the fees? One of my colleagues, Chuck Gray, who's running in House District 57, he's a staunch fiscal conservative, and he says, stick with the fees, but I haven't made up my mind yet.
Okay. Bill?
Well, thank you. I'm really proud of the fact that the sportsmen are a group that I've worked quite a bit with. In fact, there was an opportunity for a land swap on the backside of Casper Mountain. I was able to sit in with our hunters, quite a great group of folks from here in Natrona County, and we sorted all that through. And having grown up in the outdoors and been a big hunter, a big fisherman, wakeboarder, alpine skier, the whole works, the outdoors is really big for me. And so this is an area that I'm pretty passionate about. For a long, long time in our state, the hunters and fishermen have been able to fund the Game and Fish Department. Over the years, there have been several initiatives that have been adopted both by the state government and some intrusion by the federal government, which have necessitated more and more expenditure. Some of it is hidden expenditure in man and woman power in the Game and Fish. Well, I simply don't think that's fair to ask the sportsmen to step up the entire way anymore. They simply can't do it. Whether you talk about wolf management, predator control, sage grouse initiatives, there are so many things that we're dumping on the plate of the Game and Fish that it's my opinion that in a reasonable way we need to include them in consideration under the general fund. Every one of us enjoy that world-class resource out there. I think the Game and Fish needs to be supported so that they can do the work. If we don't do it at the state level, the federal government will be very glad to come in and take that over in many respects. So I think we need to fund it adequately and let that professional organization do its job.
Bill, this one's for you. What's your philosophy and decision-making process when voting on a controversial issue or regarding an issue on which you have no strong stance?
Well, that's a great question. You guys must be newspaper people. I think there have been times that constituent groups, advocacy groups have been irritated with me because they throw out a list of bills and this is the way you are going to vote. That's not the way I operate. I have conservative values, and I think my voting record will show that I have consistently been among the 10 most conservative senators down there. But I always take every single bill, whether it's 104, whether it's transportation issues, veteran issues, senior citizens funding, whatever we're dealing with, and I try to take it in my mind as to what is going to be the best for Senate District 27 and my constituents, what's going to be the best for Natrona County, and ultimately, what is going to be the best for the state of Wyoming in the long term. I think it's really, really important to listen to your constituents, and I believe I do that. I have been told on the streets that I'm the only legislator who answers every time somebody writes, and I try to do that. And that's because I want to listen to what folks back home are expecting on a given issue. And sometimes that means voting against some think tank out of Washington, D.C. that sends a bunch of information out west and says, this is the way you need to vote on an issue. That's not as important to me as listening to the people right here in our community.
Okay.
Same question?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to start by saying that according to the Wyoming Liberty Index, Bill, you're close. They say you're number 16 out of 30. You said 10, so that's pretty close. It's not bad. I know some people that are at the bottom of the list that are running for re-election, and this is not a personal battle. I'm an acquaintance of my opponent, and I respect him, and this is not a personal thing. It's just a matter of we have a little bit different way of looking at some of these issues. And I can respect what he's saying about wanting to make the best decision for Wyoming, wanting to stand on his values and his principles, while at the same time getting input from voters and not playing to special interest groups. I would say that that's pretty much my philosophy as well. I mean, if we had a pure democracy, we would have mob rule. We would just not need elected officials. We'd just, do an electronic vote every time an issue came up and go with what the majority said. And we don't operate that way. There are times when an elected person has to make a tough call, and they're not going to be able to please every voter every time. But that's what the electoral process is about as well. At the end of the day, then when you run for re-election, if the people in your district, enough of them don't feel that you adequately represented them across the board, then they vote you out. Now, I am disappointed to say that when I wrote to Bill on SF 104, I wrote to all of my legislators, actually, because I was very concerned about what that bill would do. I did not receive an answer back from my senator. And that reminds me, I wanted to kind of share what it says right here in the state constitution about the superintendent role. It says in Article 7, Section 14, superintendent of schools entrusted to state superintendent of public instruction. That's the heading. And then the next sentence says, the first sentence says, the general supervision of the public schools shall be entrusted to the state superintendent of public instruction. And then the part that he quoted earlier is next, whose powers and duties shall be prescribed by law. So if you look at that part, prescribed by law, and you put the most emphasis on that, of course, you're going to say, well, the legislature, has a lot of latitude there. But if you look at it in context and you take the first part of the sentence in with it, it says the general supervision of the public schools. I was very concerned about the fact that our legislature was considering legislation that would take the general supervision of the public schools out of the hands of our elected superintendent of public instruction. And I was disappointed that my own senator did not reply to that. I believe I also wrote him about the lottery bill, and I know this one's a little bit more controversial perhaps among voters, but I believe that a lottery is an inappropriate and ineffective way to meet the demands of state government financially. It's a tax on the poor. Those who can least afford to purchase a lottery ticket are going to be the most tempted to buy one because of their financial circumstances. And if you took the odds of winning a Powerball lottery, it would be like taking 75 million to 1 is the odds of winning it. It would be like taking $75 million and putting it end to end from Chicago all the way across the country, down through Disney World, all the way back across to Disneyland, up to Portland, Oregon, back to Chicago, all the way over, and going around that at least 2 times, and then telling the person, now if you can pick the $1 that's the winning dollar, you will win the Powerball lottery. I just think that was the wrong thing to do, and I again did not get an answer from Mr. Landen. So while I agree with his philosophy of making decisions, I was disappointed in his responsiveness to me as one of the voters, and if he was not responsive to me, and then his voting for that piece of legislation also indicates a lack of regard for the direct accountability of constitutionally mandated executive office in our state, then that concerns me about the direction that he and other legislators are taking in this legislature.
Kara, start with you on this one. What should the state's role be in economic development?
This one is a tough one. I'm a conservative, and I've been quoted slightly out of context by the paper. They took something I wrote, which probably wasn't my best writing, and they truncated it a little bit in one of the articles, and then they continue to report it. And I may not get your endorsement, and that's okay, because I am really a conservative candidate. I'm a conservative Republican. I've been a Republican since I was 18, and I came out of a family of Democrats, long history of Democrats in my family. And I really am a believer in the free market. And I think that we have really diverged from the free market economic system in our country. We pretty much do operate more as a socialist society, and we can continue to go that way, or we can try to reel it back and become more free market oriented. If we do that, that's the harder road, and it's going to cause, some sacrifice to have to be made. And it's the perfect example of, how do I approach that question? I mean, ideally and theoretically, I don't like taking public money and picking winners and choosers and saying, you can have this money and you're not a welfare case. You're not somebody who can't afford to go get a loan. You're just a business competing for public money. That on its face really is distasteful to me. However, I understand that pretty much all states do that. So if we want to get more businesses into the state of Wyoming and everybody else is doing it, maybe we need to do a little bit of it. What I would be in favor of, however, is looking at ways that we could have more objective and a realistic standard of what standards, what criteria are we going to use to apply to that process that will really make sense. So that's not just carte blanche, let's just give money for anything, let's give money to companies that really don't need it. Let's make sure that people will compete on an even playing field for that money, and that maybe that money is used in areas where if we didn't give economic development money from the public funds, that maybe then that particular area would not be developed at all. Nobody would have an incentive to work in that area or to move to that particular place. So that's how I would view that.
Bill?
Well, thank you. Regarding economic development, I've consistently supported the efforts that we've put forth in my 7 years down in the legislature with regard to economic development. My opponent's exactly right. If we do not get in the game, we will not have any of these companies in our state because other states are doing a lot of work on the economic development front. So yes, I do think we have to have an oar in that water. And I would point out that there are very stringent hierarchical systems in place to vet these projects. And the one exception that I've been involved with during my years in the legislature was the situation up in Cody, which came about pretty late before the session, and we had to deal with that at the session. But it's a tremendous opportunity for the state of Wyoming. So yes, I'm all for free market principles, but I think one of the greatest things that we can do with this tremendous wealth that Wyoming is blessed to have is to leverage and to assist our local communities, to assist our local businesses, and to provide some economic development leverage to help diversify our economy out there. And that's why I'm very supportive of some of our economic development efforts.
Okay. Wrap it up with this one. Bill, we'll start with you. Why should we choose you over your opponent?
Well, there are a couple things. One, I'm pretty proud of my heritage in this state. I think I've pointed out to people that my grandfather served in the Wyoming legislature. My other grandfather worked in the Salt Creek oil fields. I'm a Wyoming guy, and I'm very passionate about Wyoming. I'm passionate about this community. I think that has shown in my record. I have tried to be a leader. I've tried to give a lot back to our community for many, many years, long before I offered to go and serve in the Wyoming legislature. I was president of the YMCA board. I was president of our Kiwanis Club. I chaired Chamber of Commerce committees, and I've donated countless hours of time in our community. I think that gives me a broad range of perspectives that I can take to Cheyenne. I'm proud of my education. I have earned bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Wyoming, advanced graduate study from Colorado State University. One of my degrees is in public administration. I think that helps me understand some of our state agencies and how they work, and intergovernmental relations. It helps me to understand political economy. I think I have a good set of values to go with that background. I try to utilize good Wyoming common sense to the decisions that I make. And it's pretty easy to sit in the bleachers and throw rocks at decisions that are made in Cheyenne. And you can do that from behind a Facebook or somewhere on a Twitter. But the fact remains that that I take and put a lot of energy into what I do on behalf of my constituents, and I'm proud of that. And if I wasn't ready to do that for 4 more years, I wouldn't have offered to do this job. Thank you.
Kara?
Well, I want to thank Mr. Landen for the service that he has given to the state for the last 7 years. I do appreciate what he has done, and I think that he's very conscientious and he's a well-respected member of our community. With that said, I'm also a well-respected member of this community. I have a passion for the state of Wyoming that is just as strong as the passion I had for the state that I grew up in, which is very similar in its values and its background to the state of Wyoming. And I am asking the people of Natrona County, Senate District 27, to vote for me because I think that I would be somebody who would be more likely to take into account their rights in terms of protecting their constitutional rights, both in regard to our Wyoming Constitution, as we've already discussed, and also our United States Constitution, because they really go hand in hand. I come from a long line of hardworking, sacrificing people with a heritage of homesteading, just like Mr. Landen does. And my great-uncle was a U.S. congressman for 2 terms in the state of South Dakota, is still a practicing attorney at the age of 90. He was one of the sponsors of the bill that made it legal for 18-year-olds to vote, and he's still a really respected and appreciated resource for me as I fulfill a lifelong interest that I've had in politics as well. My background also makes me very well qualified to serve as a citizen legislator for the state of Wyoming. I started out in the field of education, and then I left that career field and have had 2 other careers since then. First, my career was in the telecom industry, where I started out selling and training on business phone systems, and then I worked for the Casper-based regional electrical distribution company called Crum Electric as the person in charge of their low voltage division. In fact, I helped to found that division and write its business plan. And they are at that time, a 10-branch regional distribution company. So I helped them found their low voltage division, and I was the first registered communications distribution designer in the state of Wyoming, which is a very well-respected credential in the building in the telecommunications industry. And I was recruited from there to the largest worldwide manufacturer of long-haul hybrid coax fiber cabling products in the world. And then I switched careers during the telecom bust of 2000-2001 and became an executive search consultant or headhunter, which is a very challenging career field. And I work with biotech and pharmaceutical companies across the country and internationally. And I work with international candidates, most of whom are not originally from the United States. Most of them are non-English speaking, non-native English speaking people. So along with my background, my own heritage and my professional background, I've always had an appreciation for, a broad range of commercial and business concerns. So I've covered the telecom industry, the biopharmaceutical industry, and the education industry, if you will. It's big business these days. And I have the ability to understand, issues that affect this state because of my background. Infrastructure and technology is a huge area that we will be looking at moving forward. Education, of course, and then immigration issues. We work with people internationally who have moved to this country and have worked hard, and really who are taking up the slack for what we are lacking in the United States, because we're not as hungry as people in other parts of the world are, and our kids don't seem to be as motivated to get as high a level of education as some people in other parts of the country. And immigration will be an issue that impacts Wyoming as it affects the rest of the nation. In addition to that, I have a track record for developing relationships with people that are broad and deep, and I've got endorsements from people who are not Republicans and who are not conservative Republicans, but who say that they are able to discuss issues with me that we disagree on, and that we are always able to sit down together and have a really respectful discourse on various issues. I think that's something that I'm very proud of. And finally, I have also been involved very strongly in my community in many areas that I think are important to our state. I have worked in the area of providing housing and services for homeless families. I have been involved in helping or having an anti-bullying project. And I'm working currently on a project with a friend of mine in another part of the state on depression. And depression is, according to the National Institute on Health, one of the major factors in suicide. In more than 90% of cases, depression is a factor in suicide. And suicide is consistently the, in Wyoming, Wyoming has the highest rate of suicide consistently in the nation. So these are things that I care strongly about. In addition, other issues that I think need attention in this state. Women still only make 65 cents for every dollar men make. We are the equality state, and we've made a lot of progress in the last 200 plus years, but we're not there yet. There are things that we can do, maybe not all legislatively, but if I'm elected to the Wyoming legislature, I will be using my influence not only in writing laws, but in addressing people and motivating people and getting out in front of people to try to activate our voters to get a higher enrollment rate, registration rate among voters who are eligible, and to try to help them to become more engaged and involved in some of these issues that will really impact and help our state. Some other things that I would support that are issue areas are changing labor laws so that kids who are 14 to 16 can actually go out and work, so they're not sitting idle or getting into trouble in the summertime or after school time. We need to help kids have opportunity and to learn a work ethic and to develop those skills in addition to what they learn at school. We have domestic abuse issues and laws that are lacking in that area. We have child welfare laws that need to be looked at. We have sex trafficking in the state of Wyoming. I have a whole list of other things. I'm not a one-issue candidate. I'm passionate, as my opponent is, about Wyoming, and I think it's just time for a change, and I think I can do an excellent job for the people of Wyoming, and I really appreciate you inviting us today.
Kara, Bill, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.